go. 3, 2, 1.
Hey, good evening, everyone. It is Wednesday, a beautiful Wednesday. And tonight's another R3. We did our prayer essentials last week. We're R3 this week. We're alternating. And so it's good to be with everyone. And I'm sure people will start jumping on. How are you, Rod?
I'm doing well. How are you? It is a
Good.
beautiful day outside, isn't it?
It was gorgeous. You get in the sun and it was actually it was hot. We're not used to this hot sun weather yet, but we'll get there. We're excited to have it. I see your name is. I just want to, highlight the fact that your name's not Rowdy Rod Chalk today. It's just Rod.
That's it. Thanks for beginning there, eh?
Well, hey there, eh? Definitely
Hey,
Canadian, eh?
hey.
So tonight, as people are jumping on, and good afternoon, we got Margaret, and I should probably look on here too. Sometimes they don't always show up. Good afternoon or good evening, Margaret and Bernice, Faye, some different ones jumping on. It's great to see everyone. And I know it's catch-22 because it is beautiful weather out. People are going for walks, and I saw so many people going for walks as I was driving to the church today. And it is funny, Rod, you walked in, you thought, who would have ever, once you share that, how odd it is that we're both at the church.
It's just a matter of sitting down and my door's open, your door's open, and you're across the way. And I'm thinking, okay, so we're going to go do a meeting now, but we're not walking into a meeting. We're not even in the same place. Then we both both going to close our door any second now. And this is the way that this is for right now. It's just such a strange thing, such a strange thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It is something that we'll look back on as strange days for sure. I am still thankful that we get to do this, that, man, it wasn't that long ago that the whole idea of having a video, I remember thinking about that as a kid going, can you imagine one day that we could call people and they'd see our face? And that was back with the dial phones, right? So that was so far-fetched. And yet here we are, we're talking to people. Literally, we could be viewed from all over the world right now, which is incredible. So, and you know what? That's a great way to start our conversation tonight, because we're going to talk about boundaries. And I don't know if there's a day that we need better boundaries and to strengthen our boundaries than ever before. We were talking just a few minutes beforehand. We've lived through the day and age where all these inventions have been created, not all of them, but certainly a lot of them. And it was the intention that all these inventions would give us more time in our life. And yet we run around with our heads cut off more than ever before.
Right.
We live in a day and an age where social media, we actually can talk to more people in one day than we ever had an opportunity to do. And yet there's more loneliness in the world and isolation than ever before. And so we have this dichotomy going on where, so all these inventions, but less time, all these connections, but we feel more lonely. And so something's broken. And I believe a big part of it is the lack of boundaries. So I want to share right off, because I may forget. I want to, let people know there are some phenomenal books, and as we get talking, I may forget. And so some of the things I want to show, there are 3 books I want to mention. This one's called, going this way, Margins by Richard Swenson. That's a phenomenal book. A lot of people will know this next book called Boundaries by Henry Cloud and John Townsend. That's like a classic book. You know what I mean? Like, so many people have read that book. I think it's probably part of most people's Bible schools, So,
right. Absolutely. Yep.
And then there's another book called Essentialism by Ewan McGregor, and not Ewan McGregor. I think that's the actor, isn't it?
No, that's right. Ewan McGregor.
Is it Ewan McGregor? Isn't that the actor though?
I don't know.
Ewan
If you say it like that, McGregor, it sounds a little bit more serious,
Anyway, I'll look up the name before we're done. So
apologize to all the Scottish people out there. Yes, with my accents.
That's very good. You got to do the whole show like that.
No, don't do it, Jay.
I know mine kind of sways back and forth between.
Just okay. So back on to.
You ruined my moment. And
there we go.
Boundaries. Back to boundaries. So yeah, we're talking about boundaries. So again, we have this dichotomy. We have more things available, less time. social media, more lonely, something's broken. These books really talk a lot about it. And I think these are definitely a little older with Townsend and Cloud. And then you have somebody like Danny Silk that I really believe picked up this material and began to teach on it. I remember sitting through one of Danny Silk's classes and thinking, I remember the first time he said, Jesus said no to people. And I remember like, no, what? Jesus never said no. And right away you identify, oh my goodness, that is actually a deep level of thinking that as ministers, we never can say no. Who knew? And then he shows you when he said yes to one, he would actually have to be saying no to others, because he would be traveling at times to go see, or somebody would be like, you got to come to my house. And then he would have the woman with the issue of blood that would draw his attention. And while he was there, somebody died. So when he said yes to one person, he said no to another. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is mind boggling. Jesus wasn't everywhere. You think he was, doing everything.
Right.
But he had boundaries. And so we're going to talk about boundaries. What for you comes to mind when you think of boundaries? And I know we've kind of chatted about this, and it's been an interesting thing.
Yeah, I mean, for me, whenever I think of boundaries, I mean, there's all kinds of different areas. And so there's boundaries, for example, with family. There's boundaries with friends. There's boundaries with those that we do ministry with. All of those things. But it was really, I think for me, I learned about boundaries through burnout, actually. And it was kind of in the beginning years of trying to, unfortunately, I had a real pleasing, people pleasing kind of thing. And I learned through burnout in the beginning of the years, trying to please everybody, and everybody had a right to do whatever they wanted in that sense. And so I didn't really have any personal boundaries for people. And because I thought that if I had personal boundaries, that meant I was pushing somebody away. And it meant that personal boundaries were to keep people out. And my heart never wanted to do that. Like, I didn't want to, I just couldn't wrap my heart around it. My brain could wrap around it, but my heart couldn't wrap around it until I realized that actually, Rod, you've misunderstood something, because boundaries are basically like fences and gates that allow you to give invitation to people to come in, and rather than the fact of thinking about them as boundaries of keeping people out, or boundaries of whatever it might be. It's a matter of that those boundaries. So, for example, that when I think of boundaries, I think of a house, right? And I think of front lawn. And I've always had this sense of that my front lawn is like my life, and nobody has the right to come and dump their garbage on my front lawn. Now, but if I don't have any fences, if I don't have any boundaries, then everybody feels like they can just come into my front yard, shall we say, my life, and just dump all over. And that when happens a lot of times is that person will leave and they feel good for the moment, but I'm left with all the slime. I'm left with all the junk. And I couldn't figure out for the longest time, how do I do this? How do I walk through this? And learning through mistakes, learning through, trying to put up walls instead of putting up fences and gates, and having that sense, but once I learned to be able to, that fences were important, that boundaries were important, and that what it gave me the opportunity is to say, hey, there's room for you here. I'm going to open this door. I want you to come in here right now. And what happens is when they come in, there's not a whole lot of junk all over the place. There's not somebody, in other words, somebody else hasn't spent that time sliming me, or whatever it would be. And that I'm in a better place. I'm in a better state of mind. I'm better at all of those things to invite them in and to love on them, right? To encourage them, to bless them. But I knew I needed to learn boundaries. And I'm telling you, it's still something that I walk through all the time, of trying to figure out what those things are.
It's interesting, with Caleb launching his lawn care business, and I'm helping him right now. So when you start doing something, I'm sure you experience this with woodworking, you start to see everything through the eyes of what you're doing. I'm sure every piece of wood you see can be like, oh, I wonder what I could do with that, and now all I see is grass that can be cut. But it's interesting, because as I'm walking, you know, we had to just walk down somewhere to cut some grass, and I'm seeing grass that's totally uncut, like it hasn't been cut at all yet, and I want to cut it. You know what I mean? I feel like I need to cut this grass. I should help these people out. And, you know, I say that because I want to mention a scripture that I read today, and start to look into it. I thought, okay, this is really helpful, because a lot of times I want to meet somebody's need that is not my need. It's not mine to meet. And so in Galatians 6:2, and this, you know, I love what you're talking about with the fences, and, you know, we do put up walls, and we get these things confused. We're supposed to have doors on our, you know, gates, but we have walls, and we're supposed to then, where we should have gates, we don't. We're not letting the good in. So all that comes to play with boundaries. Galatians 6 verse 2 and verse 5, it says, it's interesting because you're like, okay, which one is it? It says, bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. So we know that. And we, as you know, if you've ever read, I'm sure you've read Boundaries, it starts off with a narrative of somebody that doesn't have boundaries. And as you read it, you're like, man, I could put myself into some of those situations, you know? And
Right.
it's interesting because she keeps going back, it's a she in this case, to I'm a Christian. This is my like sacrifice unto God. I got to do all these things. And she just throughout the day takes more and more stuff on herself trying to be a good Christian. And it comes out of this, we got to bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. Galatians 2:5, just a few verses later, says, for each one shall bear his own load. And I think it's fascinating because when you look up those words, the word burden is this excessive burden, like a boulder that weighs us down. It's something that we can't carry on our own, you know, and I think tragedies in people's lives are something that happens that, you know, they cannot carry this on their own. But the other one is, for each one shall bear his own load. That load is, it's cargo, or the burden of daily toil. And so
Mm.
so when I'm walking down the road, I'm seeing people's grass, and I want to just like, I got to cut everybody's grass because it's in my brain right now. And so, but that's their daily toil. That's theirs to take care of, not mine. Now, if they want to hire us, that's their choice. They have a lawnmower, they cut it. But I could get caught up in wanting to meet everybody's needs. Now, on the flip side of it, we did actually just recently cut somebody's grass that I just felt like God was telling us to. I think that there's a burden that they're carrying, and I just felt like we needed to be a blessing. But that wasn't because I needed to go and I felt compelled and I had to do it. It was like God was showing me. So trying to learn those can be a tricky balance, because in ministry, especially, we always feel compelled. I know I do. I want to help everybody. I want to meet everybody's needs. And I'm starting to realize that I'm actually trying to meet their load. And I feel bad because I see the load that they're carrying. And yet it's the load that they're carrying. They're either called to, or they've got themselves into a mess. And I'm a helper. I want to take care of things. I want to fix things. And so I'm
Right.
in
And the healthy boundaries on that side is to know when you're basically walking in and taking something that's not your responsibility, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
that's that sense of healthy boundaries, that way to be able to know, hang on a second here, I'm here to help, but once I start feeling like it's my responsibility, then we've crossed into a total different boundary, right?
yeah,
That's something that oftentimes you know, those, either like myself at times when in the beginning of my ministry, really struggling with people pleasing or whatever it would be, that you can tend to take on responsibilities almost, you know, I don't like the phrase necessarily, but it's the phrase of a savior complex. You're becoming, you know, what everybody, in a sense of what they need, and you're going to do it for them. And really, things as far as family, when you do that, your kids don't grow when you do that. They don't learn when you do that, you know. There's all kinds of boundaries that are involved with that as well.
yeah. In that book, the very beginning, he talks about a couple that come in because they want counseling. They actually want their son fixed. And so they arrive, and I don't know if you remember this story, but the son's not with them. And I think it was one of the guys, let's say it was Henry Cloud, Dr. Henry Cloud. He's like, so why isn't your son here? And they said, well, he doesn't think he has a problem. And he says, well, let's hear what's going on. And so this kid's doing drugs and dropped out of school, you know, and all these things. And so they're like, okay, so tell me more. So only to find out that the parents have paid for everything. They always give them money. They haven't, put any boundaries in the house. And he's doing drugs in the house. And he's like, I think you're right. I don't think your son has a problem. And they're like, what? They're like, you have a boundary problem, and your son has just used that boundary issue. And a lot of times we can look back and we think, oh my goodness, we're in this situation, only find out we're in this situation because we did not set boundaries. And I think the closer you get into your inner circle, you'd probably agree, the harder it can be, right? Because you love
Sure.
these people. And I think you said it earlier, you don't want to hurt people's feelings. You don't want to let people down. You want to be there. And yet, I know at times I've actually let my family be the sacrifice to help somebody else. And I remember so clearly, it was one of the times that I knew God was speaking so clearly to me. I went out, and it was not a good time to go out, but I got that call that somebody needed me to go out, and I had to meet with them. It was an emergency. And I remember walking through the doors at Tim Hortons, and I remember the Lord clearly speaking, saying, if you don't change your boundaries, somebody else is going to be doing this to your son one day, because this person desperately needed me because their parents weren't there for him. And I thought, here I am trying to help somebody, and only falling into the trap where my son's going to need counseling one day. He still may for other reasons, but I'm hoping that I've been around enough that they could have my ear and whenever they needed me.
Right. I mean, I had to, and I say had, it's not really past tense. I still have to remind myself of that, and it's the same thing for me. So when I say this, I mean in the sense of this also goes for me, that, because of the fact that I didn't do something, or if someone didn't do something, didn't take care of something, and their life blew up. Now, I want to be there for people, but it used to be the sense of that meant that I had to put everything on hold right now, right? Everything's got to go on hold because that's what is happening. And there is this sense of being able, instead of inviting them into conversations, inviting them into help, being able to say, hey, I'm here for you, but this is what it's going to have to look like. And that takes a lot of, and I'm not talking about being a pastor now. I'm just talking about it in an average sense, with friends, with family, with kids, with whoever it is. That applies to everybody.
Yeah.
Somebody else's mess became my 5-alarm fire all the time.
Yeah.
And that there's a difference. Again, I have really struggled with this in the beginning of going, well, what will people think if I even say that? I mean, aren't I supposed to always do this? Well, and there's this thing, a sense of learning as you walk through, definitely.
Yeah. And I think, the pendulum can always swing too far. And we've talked about this many times, where sometimes, the pendulum, you want it to stop right in the middle, so we can set boundaries, and then we can actually go so far that we don't become servants anymore either, into our neighbors. And that's honestly why I felt the Lord nudging me, and I thought it was no harm in cutting somebody's grass. It wasn't, I could fit it into my schedule, no big deal. So we still have to have that side either. It's not like we isolate ourselves and become reclusive and say, well, I don't do anything for anybody anymore. No, I think as Christians, we honestly can get caught in thinking that we said it before, we need to do everything for everyone, or solve everyone's problem, or be there. And I'm realizing the older I get, sometimes I have to speak and encourage more than I always act. I want to take care of people's problems, and that is not always God's answer for that. So,
and not every time does everybody want that.
That's the other side too. Yeah.
They're just looking for an ear to listen, and that's that difference of boundaries, learning boundaries too, in the sense that someone's looking to listen. And as sometimes as a guy, and I'm not just saying it's guys, it can be girls and guys, but maybe it's personality type, whatever it is, but a fixer, right? Trying to fix everything. And that's not what's necessary. We have to have boundaries in our own life to know, okay, I'm really just supposed to listen right now.
Yeah.
And that's a huge learning curve. That one is.
Yeah. So I'll read out here. This is what Henry Cloud and John Townsend, they wrote for boundaries. They say, boundaries define us. They define what is me and what is not me. A boundary shows me where I end and something else or someone else begins, leading me to a sense of ownership. And again, using just this grass analogy, because we don't always have, some people have fences, all around their yard, and sometimes we don't. And it was interesting when I was cutting this person's grass, the only way I knew where their line ended, their property line, is because the people next door had cut their grass already. And so, there was a boundary that I could follow. And so often, I think that's an example where we don't always know where the boundaries are. And we can get confused with, as we're even speaking about our Christian walk, is it our responsibility? And we can say people have a nurses. I'm trying to remember the word, where they just they want to serve everybody. They want to be there for everybody. And I'm totally drawing a blank of what the word is. Nurses often carry it. They just so amazing at their job, but they can get sucked in that they have to meet everyone's need, kind of like we talked about even pastoring. And sometimes that boundary line can get so blurred that we step into somebody else's territory without even realizing it. And I think having kids is an example. As our kids get older, we're supposed to define those lines a little more. And it's so easy to either disempower or empower our kids. And like I mentioned, we end up having these huge problems with our kids, and we think, why are they doing this? Only to find out we've actually empowered them, because that line should have been established and we just put it way over here. We didn't have a line at all, and we got taken advantage of and wondered why they didn't have any discipline in their life or any, and it is hard, because we love our kids. We don't want to hurt our kids, and yet there's a point. I got a 17-year-old, almost 18. He just reminded me the other day, Dad, I'm going to be 18 in June and I can vote. I'm like, we both kind of went, oh my gosh, and so his boundary line is becoming more distinct because he's becoming an adult. And it's hard for us as parents. I'm sure you've gone through it now 4 times. It's hard because they're like, oh, I want to help. But yet, if we don't have that boundary in place, we can actually stunt their growth. And yet
Right.
it's so hard watching them flounder at times. You want to
Well,
step in.
and I think there's both that sense of moment of pride where you see them taking responsibility and you see them doing something and you're like, oh, that's awesome, great job, in there. But it's also a sense of going, you know what, you don't have to do it my way.
Yeah.
And that's a boundary that I had that I had to really try to walk through and figure out, even with kids, that because I did it this way doesn't mean you have to do it that way.
Yeah.
And when you choose a different way, it doesn't mean it's a wrong way, right? And as parents, when they're 12 and 13, and you're setting the way, you're setting you're setting the everything in that way. And as they get older, and different kids function different ways, there is that sense of going, okay, you know what, you're going to make your own decisions now, and I have got to become, I think Tammy put it on here. It's hard to be a parent versus a friend, and there are those moments when they're younger that, we used to joke around, but to my kids and say, okay, it's not that we're not friends, but I'm not your friend. Okay. I'm your dad, in there. Cause I've heard so many parents where well, I want to be my kid's best friend.
Doesn't work.
That doesn't work. Now, when you get older, okay, and when your kids are older and they're grown and whatnot, then that's something totally different, right? You can walk through those waters.
Yeah.
But when they're younger, they need boundaries that a friend doesn't do. You know?
Yeah, when they're younger, it's our responsibility to step in, make sure they don't make tragic mistakes. And what's coming to mind as they get older is Pastor Jeff's line that he used to say,
that's interesting.
That'll be interesting. And I think there's times I'm like, that's going to be interesting, but hey, if that's the way you want to do it, I guess this is going to be a learning experience. So,
right.
As parents, and I think we're always in that place where we don't want to see people fail. We don't want to see our kids fail. And the reality is, sometimes, as hard as it is, sometimes that failure is the very thing that will help them get to the next. And that's a whole other topic, because we've, as a society, we've begun to say what's a failure and what's not a failure. And yet sometimes there's really not a failure. There's only a learning experience if you want it to be. and that's another topic. But sometimes we got to let those boundaries hold and let them fail and go, or let them not succeed like they thought they were going to, so we can walk them through and go, well, hey, how do we do this differently next time? So
Right. Right.
What has been your, you're saying your challenge, that was do you have any challenges with boundaries that you find? Your kids are all grown up. What for you do you think is your struggle with boundaries? And you could ask me the same thing. I'm not trying to pick on you, but
Sure. One of the things that for boundaries too is the fact of not just with your kids, but with Karen and I. And, we walk through these boundaries that I didn't even know were there. So for example, and I'll just be really blunt with you and this can still come up at times in my life, but it's something that doesn't come up as often. But so for example, if I wasn't happy with something, if something wasn't going on, it wasn't going just right, then oftentimes my family or for example, Karen would be the one that would get the brunt of it rather than anybody else in there. And that's just completely wrong. And it's Karen that taught me, because she just, it's like, Rod, you know what? I've realized that I'm not responsible for your happiness.
That's
And
good.
that is a massive boundary in
Yeah.
there, because it's the sense of that we want to be involved in each other's happiness, right? That Karen wants to be involved in my happiness. I want to be involved in her happiness, but I'm not responsible for her happiness. I'm not responsible, because what happens then is you begin to become this sense of just letting everything go and bending over backwards. And I'm not talking about relationally working together, connecting together. Just talking about something that gets really, really unhealthy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then somebody's attitude, somebody's whatever it would be, if they bring it home, whether it's Karen or whether it's me. And there's that sense of going, when she turns to me and says, you know what, I'm not responsible for your happiness. And I'm like, oh, wow. And I can remember that just hitting like a ton of bricks and going, you know what, you're right. You're not responsible. I'm sorry. I repent of this, of trying to make and not even meaning to do it, but it just was happening, right?
Yeah.
And that's that sense of learning again and walking through, and that I'm responsible for my own happiness. And that's a boundary that I've decided in my own life of going, you know what, I'm going to put this as a boundary. I'm responsible for my own happiness.
Yeah.
I'm the one, you're right, in a sense of, and I know that we can go to the Lord for this, and that is an obvious given in this, right? But meaning that nobody else, no circumstances, no situation that's not responsible for my happiness, that I'm responsible for my choices. And those are healthy boundaries, I think, that all of us have to look at different times and go, you know what, I just need to make that a boundary. And a boundary is something that you either personally don't cross, or you don't, or other people don't cross, right? It goes both ways.
Yeah. Well, and that is the thing. We would be horrified if a neighbor came out and took our stake out of the ground and moved it 4 feet into his yard, or 4 feet into our yard, his stake. You know what I mean? Like, he increased his boundaries. We'd be like, no, that's not how it works. These are set boundaries. And we can do that so often in people's lives without even realizing it, like you're saying.
Right.
Really interesting. I heard this the other day, listening to a podcast, and this gentleman, when he does a podcast, he always asks the people that come on, what have you learned, or what has been the biggest struggle through COVID? And the one gentleman, speaking of boundaries, because I think sometimes we need practical things in place to help us with the boundary that's in place. And so, he was saying both him and his wife are working from home. They're older, their kids are out of the house, but they are still both working from home. And, over the last year and a half, a lot of people have discovered this. There's no boundaries anymore between work and home life. And so what he personally decided to do, when his day ends, he puts on his shoes and jacket, and he actually goes for a walk, a 15-minute walk around the block. Because he said, I used to have a 15-minute drive time to decompress and to get, literally to pray in the car, to all the burdens, that he was carrying, lifted off his shoulders. So when he walked through the house, he was present for his wife. And he was finding that he didn't have that time anymore. And so that boundary was being crossed. And, kind of like the happiness thing, this is all getting mixed up.
Right.
So I thought, what a creative idea. He takes a walk like he would have the same amount of time he would have drove, and he decompresses and comes through the house like he's coming home from work. And he's like, all right, I'm all in now. I thought that was
Right.
beautiful.
Right.
I have an 8 minute, or no, I have a 7 minute drive. It's pretty hard to decompress in 7 minutes. So there has been the odd time that I've missed my street on purpose and went a little further, turned around and came back because I had to get it out before I went home. So
Right. Right.
I want to bring up the book on margins. It's just a really good read, and it's a doctor that wrote this book who basically sees clients every day, and they'll come in. They'll come in for heart issues. They'll come in for all these different reasons. And the more he looked at it, the more he realized that's a side effect of having no margins in your life. And to give you an example, we all understand margins. Everything's backwards on this. We never write to the full page. When you print, you always have, usually it's a 3/4 inch or an inch boundary in place. Our eyes just can't read. Like it's in anything. Any book that you read has boundaries and margins
Right.
and margins, not margarine. You should never have margarine in your book. But he realized these people are coming in with all these health problems, but it actually was a symptom of not having margins in her life. And interesting enough, this book was written really before social media took off. And I would imagine the stats that he quotes in this book have just exploded, because that is one thing that is so hard to have boundaries with. It's something that, so here we are, we go for a drive and we decompress to come home, and yet work is attached to our back pocket now. Everything that you could be getting emails and texts, something that before, if you go way back, it would have been mail on your desk when you got to the office. And then it became something where you didn't open up. You actually had a big honking computer sitting on your desk that didn't go home with you, and you got your emails when you got to work.
Right.
And then we started to have computers at home more often. And now we have everything that is attached to us. And so we don't actually have boundaries half the time. And that is something for me that I'm really working on. I'm trying to, I challenged my kids the other day. I said, guys, do you ever have a moment without something audio or visual in your ear or in your sight? And interesting, I won't say who, but one of my children said, actually, Dad, it's hard not to, because it's hard to sit and listen to my thoughts. And the reality is that we are so bombarded that is actually a foreign thing for kids today to sit and think about and process their emotions. And so I can only imagine the stats that he's sharing are going to explode, already have, and will continue to, because we're just feeding ourselves with no boundaries and not processing our emotions. And then what happens is that we break down. We physically, emotionally, we spiritually, we just mentally crash, and we wonder why, because we've not put boundaries in place. And even after going through what I did 4 years ago, it's funny. I go back and I read my journal. I'm like, oh, dear Lord, I haven't put the things that I discovered 4 years ago in place, and I'm right back to where I started. And if I'm not careful, I'm going to end to that same place.
Right. Right.
And so, for me, I'm having to, at a certain time, and it's getting earlier and earlier, I'm like, phone's off. I'm done. I'm not looking at the news. I'm not looking at everything that beeps on my phone. I just need to decompress. And now I'm getting to the point, because spring, I'm not even listening to music. I go outside and I just try to sit. And I'm amazed. It can be hard at times when your brain is functioning so fast to decompress. And I think it's going to be a challenge. We're, Gen Xers, and we're talking about Gen Z now. Like, there's 2 generations behind us that this is going to be a real struggle for them. And I know we have an audience that's older than that, but we need to become aware and not criticize, but try to find solutions and help them learn a better pace and have margins in their life.
Right. Right. I mean, we all need those margins, if you call them margins, if you call them boundaries, if you call whatever it would be, in that we need to have these healthy choices in our lives. And I mean, I think that if anything that COVID has sort of done as well is it's made you look at the ugly ones, right? It makes you look at the ones that you realize, okay, you know what, this one isn't doing so well. This I used to have, maybe it's I used to have this as a healthy boundary, and this seems to have slipped,
Yeah.
and so that's the moment to just admit the fact that I need to change some things.
Yeah.
Right. And then truthfully, I don't know about you, but I need accountability within boundaries, like to begin to continue, and I need to be able to say to Karen, or to, is that okay? You know what? Can you help me with this?
Yeah.
Because this is a boundary that I've got to get back. This is something that, whatever it is, like we all have jobs. Everyone here that's listening, most of them have jobs in there, and you know what? There can be stress in all jobs. There can be relationships. There sometimes it's stressful relationships with kids. Sometimes it's stressful relationships with coworkers, friends,
Yeah.
brothers, sisters, family. All that stuff is there in everybody's life.
Yeah.
But it's a matter of going, okay, you know what? There are some unhealthy boundaries that have got to change, because
Yeah.
I know that for me, probably about I would say it's about 15, 16 years ago now, trying to map out the time of where I was at that moment. But because of some unhealthy boundaries that I had, um, it just about knocked me off my feet. And
Mhm.
there's something where, and we can say that we've learned something, and then we go right back to it again,
Yeah.
right? So what am I doing, in the sense of, am I stopping during the day? Am I just going? I am very bad for, I love to work. I love to do something. I don't really sit a lot and do nothing, right, in there. So you always joke with me about the fact of, what have you built lately, or what have you done lately, or whatever it would be, because there's always something. But that can be a joy. But if I'm not careful, if I don't have the right boundary up, it just adds to stress,
It could be a
right?
wall of
Too
isolation
much,
too, right?
right?
Yeah. You know, talking about building, I wanted to throw this in because another challenge that we have, I was thinking about all these things, like what consumes our time and why do we, struggle with boundaries, and we're so overwhelmed. And, one of the things that's very interesting about our generation, and I would say it started with our generation and way less with the baby boomers, and definitely with the builders. But if you think about our grandparents, they would probably have the same furniture from the time almost that they got married until the time that they died. And the funny thing is that the furniture was still good when they passed away, because everybody's like, "Who wants it?" And everybody's like, "I don't want it." It still actually works. And I think of what we've been, I guess in a way, what we've been fed is this constant need for change, and everything is made so flimsy today. So, you talk about boundaries. So what this sets up for us is that we always have to be updating and upgrading. And I'm not against, doing changes. I've done a lot of changes, but I also begin to realize that you can get caught in this rat race without setting boundaries. So what do you have to do? Well, I want the latest and greatest. So that means I need to work more hours. So I have more money, which means I have less time for my family, and all these cascading things happen where, like, for instance, I would love to have a boat. It's one of the things I thought of. I think it would be cool, or a jet ski or something like that. And at times I've had to weigh, what would it cost me to get something? And would I sacrifice the very thing that, like, I think, oh my gosh, it'd be great to have the family on the boat. But if I have to sacrifice 2 or 3 years of working extra to get that desire, and I sacrifice the time with my kids, by the time I get the boat, I'm not going to have a relationship with my kids, and that's just a small example. But I think we're in this rat race and we don't have margins and boundaries. And so we're always trying to work more. And we think once this project is done, or this is done, or if I paint, it'll be done. And I have
Right.
learned It's never done. And
Right.
it's trying to find that balance. You know, there's nothing wrong. I think actually I love excellence. I love upgrading my house, but I'm also realizing I don't necessarily need everything to look stellar and brand new and to keep up. It's just something that will consume my time. And we have these, my gosh, I want to be so close to my family, but we sabotage ourselves without having boundaries in place or a focus in place. And so we're taking away from the very thing that we want to have, which is social relationships, close friends, you know. It's crazy.
Yeah, the things that we can that start out sometimes as a love. So, for example, it's knowing the boundaries for me that that what my purpose is. So, one of the things that for me that's important with boundaries is knowing that I'm giving the right amount of time to the right things. Right. So that's an important boundary for me. So that I'm giving the right amount of time to Karen, my sweet wife, and the lover of my life.
Are you
And
trying to
in
suck
the
up? Is there something happen at home? Because that's, you're really putting
no,
it on
no,
there.
no, no. Come on, now we've and it's something where, but there's a right level to be giving to my. You alluded to at the beginning that sometimes with your kids that you're giving away time to somebody else that's supposed to be going to your kids, right? And so that's an important boundary for me to know that I've got these things, but it's hooked to my purpose as well. So, for example, I need to know that I'm putting the right amount of time into my life purpose. So, if part of my life purpose, which is to encourage, to build up, and to strengthen, that is something that many years ago I realized it's part of who I am and part of my life purpose. So, I need to make sure that my life is healthy enough that I can do that. And so, what began to happen is that there are good things. So, for example, good things like I love to do woodworking. I love to do these things that I'm doing. But what was funny is that I started to try to do some of it as a business. Well, it moved from something that I enjoyed and I loved to do to, oh my, this is so stressful. And it wasn't fun anymore to do these certain things because it wasn't my purpose. Right, this wasn't part of it's part of my joy, and it needs to stay as that. But the part of my if I don't know if I'm making sense in that, but it's knowing to have really clear boundaries that I'm not going to allow business to take away time from my family. I'm not going to allow so for example, for me, the energy, we've all only got so much, and the older I get, it's a matter of realizing that's getting truer all the time, that I have so much energy to give. So my boundary is knowing, okay, so do I have all of my, the level where it should be with everybody? Do I have that? Then I can give to others more then.
Yeah.
But if I'm not giving the right amount to Karen, to my kids, to in the sense of to my purpose, to all of those things, when someone else comes along, can I really be blunt about this? I feel like that if I don't have it right. So, for example, if I'm not giving the right level to Karen, giving the right level to my kids, giving the right level to my purpose, when someone comes in and asks me for time or for something, I feel like they're stealing from me, but they're not. If you understand me, right? Because my boundary is messed up. Or my margin, if you'd say, whatever it would be, it's messed up. But when I've got those boundaries right, when I've got the right boundary with Karen, the right boundary with my kids, the right boundary with my purpose, then I feel like I get to go and help them. I get to go and be involved. I get to go and, like you said, to that person and cut their lawn.
Yeah.
Right. And that's just to me really important to know that, okay, so am I putting the majority of my energy into my purpose?
Yeah, that's great. And I think what you said is a challenge for everyone. I think sometimes the very things that like I love to work. I love to be outside. I love to cut the grass. There's a lot of things I love to do. And there's a lot of things that are my load to carry. We do have to cut the grass and keep our property nice. And we can just sometimes go so far, like you're saying, and woodworking to you is um, it's not a project. I lost the word. What is woodworking to you? It is a
joy to me.
joy, hobby. That's the word I'm
Hobby
looking
to
for.
me.
You love to experiment. Now you're doing painting, it's just awesome. And like you said, the very things we love can sometimes take over if we're not careful. One other thing I wanted to bring up a little different is our society is so driven that we almost feel bad if we're taking a break. Um, and it's funny because sometimes I think, it's easier to go inside and hide and watch Netflix. But if you're out sitting on your chair reading a book or sitting on your hammock, you can feel lazy.
Right.
And you get these thoughts like I should be doing something right now. And that's just a lie that we've bought into. If at least I've bought into, I'll speak for myself, at times like you feel bad if you're just sitting and enjoying yourself. And yet, like this book talks about, our bodies are built to have rest, and we didn't bring this up. We talked a little bit about it before. One of the things I think as Christians that we've neglected is, God put boundaries in place for us. And one of the things he put in place is, hey, work hard for 6 days and then rest, take a day of rest. And I know people will be like, well, doing this, is rest for me. And I get that, because I think there are some things we can do that are energetic, that are still restful, they're rejuvenating. But I do think a lot of people don't give their minds a rest. They don't
Right.
give their physical bodies a rest, and they just go, go, go. And then all these health issues come up. That's the whole point of R3. And we wonder why. And the other thing that takes a huge hit is we work so much that we think that we're more social because of a phone, but we're actually less social. We don't know how to sit and just, like I love it when my kids finally sit down, we play a game together without our phones, or we have a campfire together. And I remember one time we were biking around a campsite at Pinery, and we were biking, and I remember seeing this family all around the fire, and every one of them had their phones out. Every one, the moms, the dads. And I thought, what a counterproductive moment. Everybody's sitting around to try to socialize, but nobody really knows how to, so they're all on their phones. And I think these are things that we have to get back to, that it's actually healthy to sit on a hammock for a little while and read a book or close your eyes. It's healthy, to sit around a campfire and find out how the day is going with people, calling somebody on a phone, or better yet, driving over and having coffee. Like, we're missing some of the beautiful things in life that keep us healthy because we're so driven for things that we've been told that we need, or just the rat race of life,
Right. Right.
Sometimes people have no choice. They're working 6 days a week, 12-hour days. And if they don't, they're going to get fired. And I feel bad, and I know our jobs can sometimes stretch into longer hours, but certainly I'm thankful that we have boundaries in place, and that we're going to jump into the last thing I want to talk about today. That's kind of a good lead in. I didn't expect it to. I didn't even know we were that far along. We're going to shift a little bit to talk about boundaries. And please forgive us, but I felt like this would be a great opportunity, and I'm going to do something with it on our Facebook page. But, Rod and I have talked at different times. I've talked with different pastors, how hard, we're going to make this personal a little bit for us, is that how hard as pastors we can struggle with having boundaries in place. Our nature as pastors is to want to help people, and we've said that throughout this time together. And so, one of the things that I want to get better at as pastors is actually getting our own boundaries in place. And part of that is just that I've neglected even to share some information for people. So I'll get a call and it'll be like, oh, this is really actually Rod's department, but now that you have me, I'll take care of it. And you're like, why didn't they call me? I'm like, well, because probably nobody knows. And so I want to share just a couple things. And if you have anything, Rob, please add it in. But one of the things that we've never probably publicly stated, at least not for a while, is that you have taken over overseeing the building and really the maintenance side of things, overseeing that, calling people, getting people to help out. And so I want to put a boundary in place today that if there's something happening at Antioch that's building related, parking lot, all those things, you got to call Rod, because Rod oversees that. Because what often happens is we're doing it twice. Somebody calls me, then I call you, it could have been a direct line right to Rod. So so that's a boundary I'm drawing and putting in place, so we have those. So thank you, Rod, for that. Another thing that I want to put in place, one of the things, again, as pastoring, is that we can often feel like we have to be on call 24/7. And part of that obviously is what we do. And I know we kind of struggle with how do we say this, but one of the things I want to put in place for us, because it can honestly feel like we work 7 days a week if we're not careful. My mind in ministry, I know, works 7 days a week if I'm not careful. And so one of the things that throughout COVID that I've really become to realize is that, man, I got to take my day off and make it my day off. And I need to disconnect. That's one of the beauties that I learned when I went on vacation, that I've been thinking about. How do I incorporate that into my daily life? Because I can't go on vacation every Monday, every weekend. That's our busy time. I can't go on vacation. So what I've come to realize is that I have to find a way to make my day off my day off. And so one of the things I'm going to ask people, and again, I'm going to put this out somewhere else so more people can see it, is that you need to know that I take Mondays off, because Sundays for us is a pretty busy day. We're up pretty early, and sometimes we can get home fairly late in the afternoon. Less now that we're not doing church services, but before, we would, I know, come home at 2 o'clock, and so Sundays are not our Sabbath. I take Mondays off, and Rod takes Fridays off. And so I want to put a boundary in place and ask people really to honor that. And of course, an emergency, and I'd say this, if it is an emergency, Mondays, call the office or call Rod. Fridays, call the office or call Jay. Because I really want to try, and we had something happen in the other day that we were trying to get in place. And because of these devices, I know you said it and then I said it, our phones are going off and we're like, I don't want to answer these questions, and yet I need to. And so we could be working all the time. So I want to put that boundary in place, that Mondays, that I try to keep Mondays to focus on my time, and you try to keep Fridays to focus on your time. And, if it's an emergency, always try to call the church. You probably have other pastors as well on staff. I'd say this as well. If that emergency isn't going to change until the morning, then wait till the morning. Some things, you've experienced it too. I'm like, this is not really an emergency, and you could have called me at 10 o'clock or 9 o'clock tomorrow. And I know for people that it's heavy on them, but I've had to learn to do that too, and go, you know what? I've just got to hold off, and I can't call. I got to give people some space. So any
Yeah,
thoughts on that, Rod?
and if it's an emergency, obviously we want to know, and
Yeah.
we want to be involved in that. That's not what we're talking about here, but we're talking about just the fact of really trying to have it so that we're all healthy. And neither one of us feel overworked right now, in a sense, so don't misunderstand those things. But it's a matter of, if we don't set these things into place, it's funny because there's so much repeat at times. We just duplicate, right?
Yeah.
I mean, people are calling you, and then you're calling me, and whatnot, and even right now, it's just like there's change, transition, learning process right now. Yeah. And so just trying to get those healthy boundaries up, so that we want to live a long life.
Yeah. Well, and we want to be, everybody needs to learn how to function to the best of their ability. And sometimes we think we're doing a favor, but we're actually just sabotaging our own functionality for the next day, when we need to actually be on, ready to go.
Right.
And absolutely, there are some emergencies, like right now, all day I've been, and I want to share this. A lot of Sherry Franz's brother-in-law.
Yep.
He's actually been rushed by helicopter to London. I've been by my phone all day. I want to be by my phone. That's somebody.
I want to know. Yeah.
Yeah, they're close to our hearts. They're family, church members, and this is their extended family. This is Leslie Kaz's son-in-law. So of course, we need to be on, and we're praying, and I'm going to keep my phone on to find out. I want to make sure I'm praying that he made it safely. Like, that's a real serious thing going on. But some things are not, and I'm guilty of making small things big things and sabotaging somebody's day. Then and they're trying to have a rest, right? So,
Right.
um,
Right. For sure.
yeah, it's been an interesting season. The workload, I would say, has been different. It's not been manual or physical. It's been a lot of emotional and mental this last season, and sometimes that can even be more exhausting than going out and doing something physical. And actually harder to set boundaries with, because you have to actually set them in your brain.
Right.
You have to tell your brain, okay, you got to stop now. You can't think about
Right.
that. Tomorrow's another day.
Right. Right.
So,
For sure.
all right. Well, I'm always amazed how quickly an hour flies by. And we just kind of touched on the topic of boundaries. I wanted to show everyone it's not Ewan McGregor. That is the actor. Let's see if you can. It's Greg McCowan. It's called
Yeah. Close. Yeah.
Essentialism.
Yeah.
That's
Close.
another fantastic book. I know we looked at that as a staff for a little bit. Um, just so many important things to, and I think that's a great word. With boundaries and margins, you have to sit down and focus on what's essential. And until
Right.
you can actually make a list of what's essential, like you said it, Karen and Krista and our kids are essential.
Right.
Those are our focus. And then you have to figure out the boundaries for everything else as well.
Right.
So unless we do that, we'll never know
Right.
what's essential.
Right. And they change, right? Those boundaries can change.
Yeah.
And there are seasons in our lives where we are, when I say that the fact of I need to know that I'm putting the right amount of resource into my purpose, right? Well, as different seasons in our lives, that purpose is different. If you're for young mom, when Karen was young and we had all these kids everywhere, I mean, her purpose, I mean, she's just pouring into these kids every
Yeah.
single day. And that was part of my responsibility as well, but it was just her, she just loved it, and it was what she lived for every day. And so the boundary was to make sure that those kids had what they needed, right?
Yeah.
And then when those kids got older, though, then they began to change, and the purposes begin to change. You have to set new boundaries, and and so for all those moms and young dads and stuff out there, come on, we know what it's like
Oh yeah.
in those things, how hard it can be. And it's a matter of boundary is like, it triggered me when you said it, because it's a mental boundary, right? Of going, I am not going to believe the lie that I'm a terrible mom or a terrible dad, or I'm not doing this. That is that boundary that you got to just firmly being, putting in there. I'm going to get my identity, in a sense, from Christ, from what God says about me and whatnot. And boy,
Yeah.
those are boundaries that unfortunately we all cross. We
Yeah.
shouldn't.
I was thinking what
But
you
that's
said
a
about
topic for another day.
I was thinking what you said about season changes. When you're putting your kids to bed every night, you're like, will this season ever change? And now we're like, we're going to bed, guys. Anybody? Good
Yeah,
night. You're
yeah,
like, how do we get here? It's like instantaneous. You're in a new season.
yeah.
So
And we have so many new parents too in our church right now, right?
yeah,
Like
yeah,
over COVID time, there's babies that have been born and that are home, and we never even seen them, right?
yeah,
In there, but their lives have changed. Their
yeah,
boundaries had to change, like those things, and that's just part of life.
yeah. All right, guys. Thanks for joining us. Hopefully that was helpful. If you guys have any questions or even a topic you want us to cover, we'd love to hear from you. If you want us to go deeper into boundaries, there's so much to talk about with boundaries. We didn't, social boundaries and all that, how to set boundaries. There's lots. But tonight was just a starter for that. Hope everyone's doing well. Keep please praying for Matt, and I'm sure there's other requests. Please let people know about that. Put it on our Antioch family page so we can pray. And we will be back with prayer essentials next week. Love you guys, and we will see you later.
Bye now.